Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Operation F.A.U.S.T from Gray Fox Games. This is a bluffing card game that uses what I call the coup mechanism, because coup is the most well-known game that actually makes use of that mechanism, where you are using an ability based on a card you are claiming to have in your hand, even if you don't actually have that card, and hoping that the other players don't call you on your bluff. Now, the thing is, the theme of the game is significantly different than any of the other games I've played that use this kind of bluffing mechanism. You are all art collectors, or patrons, or restorationists during World War II who are trying to rescue as much art as you possibly can from the Nazis before it is destroyed or shuffled off to some hidden bunker somewhere for the rest of time. So what you're trying to do is gather these artwork cards, get enough money, which depending on the number of players is either $900,000 or $1 million worth of art, and you're going to do it by using all these different resources, or claiming to use these different resources, like art dealers and the ally forces themselves, and so on. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but let me go ahead and give you a brief overview of how the game is played. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, let me run you through Operation F.A.U.S.T. This is a competitive game for 3 to 8 players. The goal of the game is to be the first player to accrue $1 million worth of rare art, unless you're playing in a 7 or 8 player game, and then you only need to get to $900,000 worth of art. So every player is going to get a little cheat sheet card, which will tell you all the different types of cards in the game and their quantity, and then also just a little reference sheet on the back of there. Every player is going to get 2 plot cards from the plot card deck, and then the rest of the cards, I'll just flip these around the proper way, are going to be put off into the center of the table. There are a number of forged document cards equal to the number of players. This is a 5-player setup here. Then you're going to shuffle up the art cards. You're going to make a stack of them, and you're going to put 4 of them next to the deck, just in that kind of arrangement, so everyone has access to those. And then you're going to have the stocks of intel chips. There's 1 chips, 2 chips, and 3 chips. 1 chips, 3 chips, and 5 chips. You'll just keep those off to the side. Those kind of are like the currency of the game. And I'm sorry, actually, each player is going to start with 5 intel at the start of the game. So we'll do that little bit of setup. So once you get done with all that, then you can begin. Now, as I said, the main goal of the game is to get this artwork and to get a certain amount of it, either $1 million or $900,000, depending on the number of players. As soon as you have that much artwork face down in front of you, you are allowed to just declare that you've won the game, regardless of whether it's your turn or not. You show the cards, the art cards that you have, and if you have forged artwork, you need to be able to cover up with forged document cards, 1 for each of those. And if you have enough money's worth of paintings, you win the game. That's that. Now, the main mechanism that you use to get to that point is these plot cards, and using the abilities of those plot cards, whether or not you actually have the cards or not, and if you don't actually have the cards, hoping that the other players don't call you out on it. But before we get to that explanation, there are a few basic actions that you can do on your turn. Now, first off, at the start of the game, you're going to decide who's going to go first, and the rules tell you that you each draw a random artwork, compare the value, and then shuffle up. I don't know why you just don't roll a die. It doesn't really matter. But once you decide the turn order, it's just going to keep going around and around like that until you get to the end of the game and someone declares themselves the winner. So, the 3 basic actions. First thing you can do is recruit. When you recruit, you're going to spend 4 of your intel in order to take a plot card from the top of the deck. Now, there's a maximum hand size that you have depending on the number of players. For 5 players, you're allowed to have a maximum of 4 cards in hand, just as an example. The next basic action you can do is recover artwork. You spend 10 intel points in order to either take one of the cards that is next to the art pile or to take one off the top of the art pile. And at this point, I'll go ahead and show you what those art cards are going to look like, just to give you a taste of what you're fighting for here. So this is a normal piece of artwork. There's nothing odd about it, and this is the value of the artwork at the bottom of the card. This one happens to be worth $200,000. This is just the nameplate for the art piece. It has historical significance, but no real gameplay significance. Some of the artwork, however, are forgeries. Now, they are still worth money, but only if at the end of the game, when you declare victory in the game, you can actually cover up this piece of artwork with one of the forgery documents. So it's You have to have one for every forged piece of artwork that you have. Then it makes it valid, and you are able to count it for money and possibly win the game. There is one card, however, that is worth 0. However, here's where the one of the interesting bits of the game comes in. You literally cannot win the game without covering them all up with forged documents. So even if you don't care about the fact that it's worth 0 and you don't need it to win, which obviously you don't, you still need to cover it up with a forged documents card, or you still cannot win even if you do have 1,000,000 amongst your other art pieces. Then you have Degenerate Art. Now, this one is not a forgery. You don't have to cover it up with a forged documents card, and it is worth its amount, but some of the card abilities make these pieces of artwork in particular easier to steal away from the other players. I'll explain that in a few minutes. And there is one card in the entire deck that is both a forgery and degenerate, meaning it's easy to steal, and you still need to cover it up with a forged document in order to have it count at the end of the game. Speaking of the forged documents, the last of the basic actions I'll explain is forging, which is just paying 3 intel to the pool, and then you're able to take one of the forged documents cards, assuming there is still one available, and then you have it for future use. But now, let's get down to the meat of the game. Most of the action in the game is going to revolve around plot cards. That is the last action that you can take. On your little cheat sheet here, it will take you through the 5 types of cards that are in the game, and also in the bigger number next to each of the portraits here is how many of those cards are actually in the deck. As an action on your turn, you can claim one of these special abilities. It is completely irrelevant when you're claiming the action whether or not you actually have the card in your hand. It's only relevant if someone is going to call you out on that and say, I don't think so, you probably don't have that. They make that guesstimation based on how many cards are of that type are actually in the deck and how likely it is that you actually have it. So if you're claiming a French resistance ability, that may be possible. There's 11 cards in the deck, and so it's more probable that you're going to be claiming that. But if you're claiming an allies card, knowing that there's only 2 of them in the entire deck, and maybe you're at the start of the plot deck and barely anyone has played anything, it may be very unlikely that you're actually doing that. Or I'm sorry, that you actually have that card. But before we get to the consequences of all of that, let me just explain all the different abilities on the cards. So first and foremost, the thing you need to know is that each card has 2 potential abilities. One of them is a hand ability and one of them is a table ability. If it's a hand ability, when you claim the action of the card, you get to keep it in your hand. So if no one calls you out on it, you'll be able to maintain the hand for the card for future rounds, and you don't have to do anything with it. But if it's a table ability, regardless of whether you have the actual card or not, you have to put that card down on the table, and whether or not you are challenged or not, that card is going to go into the discard pile. When cards are discarded in this game, the plot cards, they go face up into the discard pile. So if a card is discarded for whatever reason, people don't get to see whether you were actually lying or not, although you can certainly tell them later. So we'll start off with the French resistance cards. There's 11 of them in the game. The hand ability is that you get to take 2 intel from the pool for every French resistance member that you hold. So if you're claiming that ability, you're literally saying, okay, I have 2 French resistance members, so I'm going to take 4 intel. Does anyone want to call me out on that? Then you have the table ability, which is draw 2 new plot cards, then discard any 1 plot card from your hand. There are 6 spies in the deck. The hand ability is to secretly look at any 2 art cards in the art cache, which is the 4 cards next to the art pile. The table ability is to receive a negative 3 intel art discount, which means you don't have to spend 7 for one of the pieces of art. Or you get to take 3 intel from the pool for every spy that you choose to table, which means discard, or you will have to discard that many. Then you have the art dealer. You can either take 3 intel from the pool or table it to trade any art card you hold for a random art card held by another player. The double agent, there are 3 of him. You can steal 3 intel from any player or table it to secretly look at 1 art card from the art pile, or which is the pile of art cards, or held by another player. If it's degenerate, you get to confiscate it. So that's what I was saying earlier. It's easier to steal Degenerate paintings than not. And then you have the Allies card. There's only 2 of them. You take 3 intel from the pool. Also, you get to ignore the double agent and the art dealer. So you just say, I have an ally card. You can't do that to me. And see if they call you out on it. Table ability is that you can look at all the art cards held by another player and then confiscate one of the forgery cards. Now, let's talk about calling someone out. If someone claims an ability and another player says, no, I don't think so, first off, it's first come, first serve. So if multiple people want to call the bluff, it's whoever calls it out first. Then that player says, nope, I don't believe you. I don't think you actually have the spy, or whatever it might be. At that point, there's 2 things that may happen. If the player actually happens to have the spy, then either way, the player is going to have to reveal the card that they've just tried to play. If the player actually had the card in question, in this example, the spy, then that player gets to resolve that action. They're going to still have to discard this card face up or face down into the plot card discard pile, but then they'll get to replace that card back into their hand with another card, which no one is going to know. And then you get to take, the player who was wrongly accused gets to take half of the intel that the accusing player had. And by the way, you need to have at least 2 intel in order to make an accusation. And numbers are always rounded up in this game if you have an uneven number. So if you have 3 intel and you have to lose half of it, you have to lose 2 of it. So the aggrieved player who was wrongly accused and had to dump their card still gets to do their action, but they take half of the accusing player's intel. However, if it was the reverse, where someone accused you of not having the right card, like, you don't have the spy, and you're like, okay, yeah, you're right, then you still have to discard that card and replace it, and now you, the accused player, have to give half of your intel to the player who made the accusation. If you don't have any, well, then you don't have any, and they don't get any. But the important part is you don't get to do your action, and you have to draw a new card. And that is really all there is to Operation F.A.U.S.T. You're using your plot cards, or using the plot cards you claim to have, in order to gather as much intel as you possibly can, and then use that intel in order to buy paintings, hoping that you get the paintings that are worth a lot of money. They are in different variations, from like $200,000 to $500,000 for one of them, which would be, I think, this one here, the Mona Lisa. And hoping that you don't get forgeries, but if you do get forgeries, hoping that you can cover them up with forged documents, and hoping that you may not get degenerates because other players may steal those. The end result being that as soon as you can get either $900,000 or $1 million worth of paintings, you can claim it and win the game. That is Operation F.A.U.S.T. Let's get to my final thoughts. Now, I like the theme in Operation F.A.U.S.T. a lot, although I will say that it's mostly pasted on. At a certain point, you're just shuffling cards back and forth, and a lot of times you don't even think about the names of them that much, or especially you don't think about what they represent. So it is a pasted on theme, but I still like it. I mean, it's definitely a theme that hasn't been explored very much in games. There's lots of World War II games, but how much of it has to deal with people rescuing this artwork? And the rulebook has little bits and blurbs of history about all the photographs that are used in the game. And that's another thing, is that normally I don't like it when games use public domain artwork. It feels kind of like a cheap way out, which it is, but it works very well for this game and bringing out some of the flavor and the theme, because other than that, it is a pretty themeless game. So it's not a strong theme, but I like it because it's an original and a unique one. Moving on to the gameplay, as I mentioned in my intro and during the overview, it uses the coup mechanism, which is a mechanism that I like a lot. Deciding, what ability you want to use the most, and deciding whether or not you can get away with a bluff of it, or sometimes legitimately having the ability and hoping that other players call you on your bluff so that they can get damaged in some way, depending on which game type it is. Which in this case is them having to lose their intel, and sometimes you want to just get rid of your card anyway. So that in and of itself is strong in this game. However, Operation F.A.U.S.T. has a few significant problems, for me at least, that really hamper it and hurt it more than other games I've seen use this kind of card bluffing. For one thing, there's too many cards. There's too many cards in circulation. There's too much information to keep track of. It's really hard to even, with a limited amount of cards, like in Coup, which really is the only main game I can compare this to, it's easier to keep track of what people might be, and it keeps the tension high. But with this game, I mean, with the French Resistance, there's 11 cards of that type. Some of the other ones are 6 cards or 4 cards, and it's there's just too much going on. There's too many things floating around back and forth. It never feels like you can really do some solid deduction work most of the time. It's just really wild speculation and guessing until you get down through the bottom of the deck, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess if I've been counting cards, I've seen this many and this many and this many. But by that point, the game, and that's another problem with the game, it's dragged on quite a bit. This is definitely much longer than I think the actual gameplay here warrants. Another problem that I have is with the balance of the game as far as the different types of cards. So definitely with the artwork for sure, because there are pieces of artwork that are only, putting aside like the forgery that's only worth 0, and how hard it is to actually make use of the forgeries. There are cards that are worth 200,000, 250,000. Okay, if you're going at that pace, you're going to need 4 cards at least to get to the point where you can win the game. But there's cards that are 400,000, and there's a 500,000 card. If you get those, you are solid. And on top of that, if you do get stuck with the forgery cards, it makes it that much more difficult for you to actually succeed in the game, like way more than the other players, because now there's a limited set of these forgery documents. You have to use one of your precious actions in order to get it, and other players can take it away from you, so that's problematic to me. And all of these different things are just added mechanisms thrown into the pile of what really is a simple game, but with all these added clunky things thrown in, it just kind of protracts the length of the game and doesn't really add too much like excitement and tension, as I said before. One of the problems that I have, though, and probably the main issue that I have, is with the whole bluffing and challenging your bluff, because there is not a tremendous amount of incentive to actually call someone on their bluff for most of the time. Losing half of your intel, if you have a significant amount of intel, is crippling. This is people racing to get art as quickly as they possibly can. Even taking into account the fact that art is very unbalanced, you still need to get as much of it as you possibly can as fast as you can. If you only have pieces of art that are worth 200,000, you need to work doubly hard to do that. Wasting an action to call someone out and then losing half of your intel, which means you have to spend more actions to get that intel back, is way, way too crippling. So most of the time, it is only worth your while to call someone out when you only have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 intel, enough to call the bluff, to be able to do so, but that it won't hurt you that badly. And for the other players, if you're accumulating a lot of intel, you're going to play it safe. You're going to get rid of it as quickly as you possibly can, just so that other players, if they do try to call you out, it's not going to hurt you as badly. But most of the time it's okay because people are too scared to do so. And because of the wide pool of cards, a lot of the times people are not lying. It's very easy for someone to just say, well, I have 3 French resistance, so I'm going to get a ton of intel. And a lot of the times, they do. Now, you might say, well, okay, part of the game is forcing someone to do a discard. Like, okay, you've got a really great ability. Well, I don't care. I'm going to force you to do a discard. But at a certain point, people want to pivot to new cards anyways. They want cards that's going to make it easier for them to get either the artwork at a discount, or to change out, or to look at the artwork and see which one's the best for them, or to get the forged documents. You want to get rid of your cards that you have at a certain point because you don't want to stagnate. So forcing someone to discard is not a huge deal. And again, if there's 11 French resistance cards, you're probably going to draw another one anyways if someone forces you to discard. So it's very weird. This feels like, I saw another comment, and I'll borrow this because I think that it applies to this game very well. There's a lot of very interesting things in this game that, like, a lot of interesting game mechanisms that just don't cohere into a very smooth flowing and interesting game. I like the theme, or at least the idea of the theme. I like the coup bluffing mechanism, but there's just too many extra variables and clunky things. I'm not going to say it's a horrible game. Certainly not. I was entertained by parts of it. But when I'm comparing it to other, not even just games like Coup, but other light card games or hit and roll deduction games, it just doesn't hold up. It's a great idea that I think just needed to be more streamlined, more developed, just to clear away those rough edges. Because as it is now, it's just okay. That is Operation F.A.U.S.T from Gray Fox Games. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.